synth pad is an elongated chord that we generally put in the background to fill out that environment or the atmosphere of our track. In this video, we're going to be making LUSH synth pads. Let's do it. So the first protocol for making synth pads is the envelope. If you don't have the envelope right, then you're just not making a pad. You're making something else, like a stab or a pluck. So this is pretty important. Lucky for us, it's easy to do. So I'm just going to pull up Serum here, just the initial saw wave preset, and I'm going to pull up the attack, keep the sustain nice and high, and then bring up the release, something like this. This is the shape that we're looking for when it comes to making a pad. So a slow attack and a long release. Guess what? You've got yourself a pad. When it comes to the filter, you can do a whole bunch of things, be as complex as you want. I'm simply going to get this envelope we just made for the amplitude and just assign that to the cutoff. So we just got this sort of sound now, and maybe bring this down a little bit as well. So our amplitude is detailing our filter envelope. If you want to make a filter envelope, I would say just sort of use the amplitude envelope that we just made as a guide. We want to make something similar to that. You can make some slight differences in the filter envelope. That's cool, but you want to make it similar because we still want that pad shape overall. Pads are generally chords, so next up we need some notes. You don't need to overcomplicate this in the beginning. All you actually need for this is a triad, a major, or a minor, and that is all. So I'm just going to go in here and make a triad. So I'm going to make a minor chord, something like this note here, this one here, C minor chord. Right, so I'm going to elongate, drag that MIDI clip out, and then hit duplicate a few times, sort of extend this note out over here. So again, with all of these steps, you can really go as crazy as you want. You can add some seventh chords, maybe some ninths and things like this, and sort of add a whole bunch of extensions if you want to experiment around with the different flavors they offer. But a pad is generally used for the sort of background tension building elements, so you really don't have to be too complex. I had a period in my life where I was using a lot of seventh chords and I was really liking that sound. But for this example, I'm a big preacher of its simplicity, so I'm just going to go with the regular triad minor chord. So right now we've got a pad, looks like a pad, feels like a pad, sounds like a pad. We've got all the pad essential elements to it, but it's really not that lush. So let's talk about what makes a pad sound or feel lush. If we think back to sort of an orchestral setting, and there's a whole bunch, multiple violins, some of them are playing the same note and some of them playing harmonies. This is the key ingredient here. What makes an orchestral string section sound really lush and big is the multiple different duplicates of a whole bunch of people playing the same notes at once, or essentially the same chord at once. So what I'm going to do to sort of emulate this is we're actually going to add another oscillator in here. So what this does is now whenever I play one note, we have two oscillators. I'm going to just put that through the filter here as well. Click this button here. So for every single note that I play now, we have two sounds playing. But the thing is, right now they're not going to be doing anything, and that's because these sounds are the exact same. So when we have two of the exact same sounds, we're just going to be increasing in volume, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to go over to this fine control, and I'm just going to detune this one slightly, and that will create this interesting sort of phasing effect. Let's have a listen to this. So oscillator B off. You can tell it's just a single tone. And now we're starting to get that orchestra of tones, those multiple tones. And what this does is now I have two oscillators or two voices playing every time I hit one note. So if I'm playing three notes, that's six voices. So the difference between this and this, if I start to play more notes, then we're getting even more voices. You can actually see down here, there's a counter of how many voices you've got. If I'm playing 5 notes, I've got 10 voices down here. So this is our sort of more or less classic way of doing it, and it's still a very effective approach. But what we have with these sort of more modern synthesizers is this thing called unison, and that's exactly what we were just talking about then. As I slide this number up here, you can see that it's actually duplicating the oscillator. It's duplicating the voices here, and then it's detuning them slightly from each other. So let's say I've got 2 voices. That's exactly what we just had then. As I add more voices, we can detune them more from each other, and we have a wider spread of voices. Now it's kind of like we have 7 different instruments in that orchestral string section, and they're slightly detuned from each other, and we're creating this really wide and lush sound. Also, if you're interested in some free Serum presets, then I'm going to throw a link in the description for our Serum EDM Essentials pack, so you can download that one if you're interested. But let's keep going with this. What we're going to do next is add a little bit of movement. So all pads need a little bit of movement because then it stops it from being really static and stale to being moving around, and it makes it much more interesting. Movement is a key ingredient for pads. So I'm gonna go get my LFO here, and we can just assign this to anything that we want. I could turn on one of these warp modes, and you can sort of just mess around with these things and see what they do. You can see that it sort of just changes the sound of things. So we could, assign an LFO to something like this and have that moving around. So now we've got a bit of movement there. I've got my LFO. I could assign it to the cutoff, something like this, and I'm just going to bring it down to it's a little bit. Not only we can use LFOs, we can also use envelopes for movement as well. So I could assign and make another envelope over here, something like this, and assign that to the cutoff as well. So we have multiple envelopes. I could even put it in the reverse direction. There's endless different parameters you can create for movement. In Serum, our modulators are all of these things down here. So you'll notice that we can also use velocity and note for modulation as well. So the higher the note that I play, the higher the value for which it's going to be modulating is going to become. So if I was to assign this to cutoff, as I play higher notes and higher chords, the cutoff is going to get higher as well. So we can use this for movement as well. We can use the same thing as velocity, and you can program in movement for particular notes in there. So that has a whole bunch of creative possibility there. But now we've got this pad. I'm just going to bring back the cutoff movement over here, so just make that something really small. So now we got this pad, which is sounding quite nice and lush. And I think I might even layer it with another oscillator here. So let's just try a different sound, maybe something like this. And I could even put it down an octave, or maybe even up an octave. I quite like that actually. So now we're starting to create a really nice lush sound. So the last point here, and this one's the most fun as well, is processing. So I'm in my audio effects tab here. I'm going to grab reverb and delay. Reverb and delay are going to be your best friends, especially when it comes to pads. Let's go get a delay. Let's even maybe try out some modulation effects. So maybe some chorus. This is going to make it sound really lush as well. Again, this is doing a very similar thing to unison. It's sort of duplicating the voices and sort of pitching them around. Let's just turn off the chorus for a moment and just dial in some reverb. So I'm going to bring the decay up. Keep the other things about where they are, and maybe bring up this a little bit. I think I'm liking how that's sounding. And then I can go to my delay here as well and just mess around with this. So now that is sounding beautiful. I'm just going to sort of minimize these for a moment and go grab a sound design rack. This filtered modulation one. And this is just echo and reverb in parallel this time. If you want to learn about how I made this, you can check out the video that I've linked at the top. This is just a little bit of filter movement before the reverb and before the delay. And this creates this interesting sort of filtering effect here as well. One of my personal favorite racks. So processing is a key ingredient for making your pads sound lush as well. Maybe I'm going to try a bit of vibrato as well. So that's just adding a little bit of pitch wobble. And I quite like that as well. So these are the concepts of how to create lush pads. You just sort of need to follow these steps and you'll be creating lush pads pretty much every time, but you can change each one of the steps along the way. So I could use completely different waveforms, I could use different types of filters, I could use different types of LFOs and envelopes and modulate different stuff and create completely different results. So I've been going over how to actually design your own pads in here. There's actually a whole bunch of other ways that you can make pads out of pretty much anything using sort of sound mangling and manipulation. So let's just use this up as an example. I'm just going to do a quick example here because I've actually made a separate video how to make pads out of anything. I can link that at the top as well. And so this one just sounds like this so far. It's just a sort of sample that I found. It's a little bit warped already, but maybe let's just sort of pitch this around. Maybe we can just change the warping algorithm. And the thing is, if you put enough reverb on pretty much any sound, that it becomes sort of like an atmospheric wash that you can turn into a pad. So I'm gonna go grab a filter, auto filter, and just drag that afterwards. We've already got the general gist of a pad. If you think about it, we've actually got the amplitude envelope of a pad. We're getting this amplitude envelope out of the reverb device itself. You know, it's got a really slow attack time, and then it's got a really long release time due to this decay knob. So that is the shape of a pad. And once you have that amplitude shape, then we have a pad, and we can just modulate it, make it move, make it more interesting in a whole bunch of different ways. So I could go grab a chorus and put that on there. I could go grab a delay. I could go grab some other processing devices, put them after there as well. But I think what I'm also going to do is hold shift and actually warp this out really long. Let's just have a listen to the result here. So this is just a quick example of how you can turn any sound into a pad, and then we just start modulating it to give it a bit of movement and interest so it's not so static and boring. So try these things out if you haven't already, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.